Our next speaker then this evening is Professor Jessica Bramham. Jessica Bramham is an academic clinical neuropsychologist. There she is on screen now. She has a BA in Natural Sciences from the University of Cambridge, a doctorate in clinical psychology and a PhD in neuropsychology from the Institute of Psychiatry, King's College London. She worked as a clinical neuropsychologist in the UK National Adult ADHD Service at the Maudsley Hospital in London, then became a clinical lecturer in King's College London. She was appointed at UCD School of Psychology in 2008. Jessica's main research and clinical area of expertise is neuropsychology, particularly around adult ADHD and its co-occurring challenges. She is currently contributing to the development and evaluation of the HSE National Clinical Programme for Adult ADHD, Model of Care for Ireland, and several initiatives in collaboration with ADHD Ireland. So I'm going to pass over to Jessica, who is going to speak to some research that she's recently completed.
Great. Thanks, Sonia. I'll just share my screen here. Yes, so unfortunately, this presentation is not going to be anywhere near as articulate or artistic or powerful. It's a very hard act to follow, Jessica Kay, so thank you very much for sharing your story. And I guess what I'm going to be doing now is far more reductionistic in a way, and I do apologize for that at the end. But I guess the purpose of this piece of research was to try and better understand some of the aspects of suicidal behaviour and self-harm in adults with ADHD, specifically in Ireland. So I'll screen share there. And I'll stop my phone from flashing. This was a project that we conducted over the last year, a bit longer actually, as part of a team of researchers. I had some wonderful PhD students working as research assistants alongside me. Christina Siri in particular was amazing in developing the ethics application and delivering the survey. And then we've also been working in collaboration with the National Clinical Programme with Dr. Margot Wrigley and Fiona Riordan, the programme manager, and then the wonderful Ken Kilbride has supported us all the way from ADHD Ireland in terms of recruitment and being a great advisor. As I said, it was funded by NOSP, the National Office of Suicide Prevention, and it was under the remit of minority groups. And so I think that given that ADHD is a relatively new area for them to even be considering, we got the funding on that basis. But they have appreciated that in our presentation since that it's been a very, very important area for them to learn more about. So I'm sure that most people here will know about ADHD, so I won't go into too much detail. But we're well aware that it's relatively common in childhood and continues into adulthood for a lot of people, be that the full syndrome or that in part it may still continue. I should also, with a note of caution here, I do my best to use neuroaffirmative language. I have grown up with the medical model the last 20 years, so I slip back, I'm afraid, from time to time, but I am very much on that journey, I guess, of learning more about neurodivergence. So yes, with that in mind, I'm kind of talking about prevalence rates and symptoms and so on. But I think there's a lot to be said about reframing this as well. So we expect the core symptoms to be inattention, impulsivity, hyperactivity. Those are what are in the DSM-5. But also, I think clinicians would generally agree now that there is another component which is very common for people in the area of emotional dysregulation. And that's possibly quite important in doing suicide and self-harm research. The majority have some sort of co-occurring mental health condition. And in screening studies in Irish adult mental health services, the rates have been as high as about 20% when you do adult ADHD screeners. And when in Sligo, they continue to do full diagnostic workups with those people who screen positive, it was even 16%. So a lot of people are there in adult mental health services who have underlying ADHD that is undiagnosed. We know from international studies that the rates of suicidal behaviours are much more common in adults with ADHD, and that ADHD is seen as an independent risk factor on its own when you do kind of mediation analysis, taking other aspects into account. Now, when we were doing this study, we were slightly concerned because it was one of those worst case scenarios when you're actually doing research that the exact same study came out, but with bigger numbers and a kind of more robust methodology. This was done in Northern Ireland, including people from the Republic, in students, college students. There was a survey that was collected on mental health in general, including an ADHD screener, and they gave everybody who participated a hoodie, which seemed to be a good recruitment strategy. So they had 1,600 students participate, and there, people who were above threshold on the ADHD rating scales, they found that there was a prevalence of 44.5% of people having suicidal ideation and 13% suicide attempts in that group, which is really quite striking and very close to home. So we followed a similar methodology, which I'll explain in a minute, but I guess we were trying to unpick these three possible reasons for why the risk is there. That it could be because of ADHD itself, that people may be more impulsive and follow through on certain emotions, or it might be because of the co-occurring mental health difficulties, that people with ADHD are more likely therefore to have depression, and it's because of the depression that they're more at risk of these suicidal behaviours and self-harm. Similarly with anxiety or emotion regulation difficulties, that the kind of emotional brakes aren't as available, and that leads to the increased risk. And then the third possibility is it's well established that alcohol and substance use, the rates of suicide are much higher in those groups, affected groups. So it could be a byproduct of people with ADHD having elevated levels of substance use disorders. So I suppose the overall aim was to raise awareness, actually, and to find out more about this population, and then also to kind of try and pick a little bit about what it was the strongest predictors of the suicidal and self-harm behaviours. So we disseminated an online survey, entirely anonymous online survey through ADHD Ireland, who kindly supported us with this. We were very cautious. I was very nervous about it, that people would just be alarmed at having a survey of this nature sent through to them. But we were advised by people, ADHDers, who some people who said, it's actually quite useful for people to be able to share this information. So we also were advised by the board of ADHD Ireland wisely that we wouldn't be sending this to parents, because it isn't an inevitability that people with ADHD will develop these difficulties. But we were targeted for adults with ADHD, and then we also had it shared on various Facebook pages, kindly assisted by the board of ADHD Ireland again. So we measured these key variables in terms of ADHD, suicidal behaviours, self-harm, and then the kind of comorbid difficulties, so anxiety, depression, emotion regulation, and then alcohol and substance use problems. And this is what we found. So 136 people completed the whole questionnaire, which was amazing, and I am so grateful to them for seeing it through. 90% of them had been diagnosed in adulthood, which probably is fairly representative of the adult ADHD population in Ireland, that a lot of people have received their diagnoses as an adult. There were more men than women, which isn't that unusual in research, but I guess for ADHD, you might expect more males. That said, in adulthood, we do see more females coming forward. So this may be a good representation of in terms of gender. Mean age was 39 years. We had a good age spread. 78% had third level education, so highly educated group, and 70% were in employment, so doing really well. And you wonder about people who aren't linked in with services with ADHD Ireland, who haven't been able to complete this survey. So they may be a kind of missed group that we weren't able to sample. And these were the findings, which were way, way higher than I ever imagined. That 20% of people filling in the survey had actually attempted suicide in their lives. A further 61% had experienced suicidal ideation, and it was only 19% who had not. So that was really, really quite extraordinary, not that inconsistent with the international literature. But we found that suicidality was most associated with more severe ADHD symptoms. It wasn't associated with depression, but it was slightly with anxiety and certain drug use, but not alcohol and cannabis. The questionnaire that we used for suicidal behaviours also asked about how many times have you thought about killing yourself in the past year? And here you can see that actually this wasn't as historical as you might have thought, that it was still relatively active for some people. And then the final question about how likely is it that in someday you may attempt suicide, 10% of people said likely. So these are people who are linked in with services, know that they have ADHD, and still that seems to be on people's minds and something that they may follow through in. So it's through with, which is a really worrying statistic. Then turning to the self-harm, so non-suicidal self-harm, 50% of people had performed some self-harm in their lifetime, starting at a very young age, which was really upsetting to see. We don't really know what the base rate is in the general population. We hear about it being on the rise in adolescence, and the statistics suggest up to 4% of the population. But you can see this is hugely above that. We found that it was again associated with more severe ADHD symptoms and with emotion dysregulation this time, and cannabis use, but not alcohol use. So going back then to these three possibilities, I guess our findings speak to some extent to them, but I don't think there is one single answer. The symptoms of ADHD themselves, whether it's the co-occurring mental health difficulties or whether it's the substance use, alcohol issue. So we found that the more severe ADHD symptoms were associated more with suicidal behaviours and self-harm. Depression didn't seem to be a driver there. However, in the Northern Irish student study, it was a strong mediator. So there may be issues with the way that we conducted our study that affected that, I'll say in a minute. We found that anxiety was associated with suicide, but not with self-harm, and vice versa for emotion regulation difficulties. And then in terms of the alcohol substance use, suicide wasn't associated specifically with alcohol or cannabis, but self-harm was associated with cannabis use. But as I said in a minute, that was, retrospective. So what does this mean? The implications, are fairly obvious, that we need to really make sure that we're being finding as many services as possible for adults with ADHD. The people who are waiting for services need to be seen faster. The people working with ADHD more widely need to be aware that this is in the background potentially for some people, and to be more vigilant and be able to support those people. And then the opposite, I guess, the corollary is making sure that people working with people with suicidal behaviour and self-harm, that their ADHD may be in the background, that it may need to be screened for, that people need better training about being able to pick it up and signpost people to appropriate services. And also organisations that have been mentioned already, such as Peter House, where it may not be on their radar as much about how to go about looking for ADHD. So again, it's about the sort of general raising of awareness. Now, this study is full of limitations. Hands up, it was the best arrangement that we could come to, and I do still think there's a lot of value in what we found. Obviously using an online sampling method where people are asked to report suicide and self-harm is going to lead to a biased sample. Although we did in our approach say that we want you to take part regardless of whether or not you have experience of this. But it's more likely that people are drawn to contribute if they have something specific to say. That said, though, as I said at the beginning, that they're a very high functioning sample in terms of education and employment and so on, and that you would imagine that there's an awful lot of people who are undiagnosed with ADHD, who have not received any services at all, who may be in prison, who have all sorts of other difficulties. And therefore may also have suicidal behaviours and self-harm. So we may be missing a lot of people as well in our sample. So I don't know that we can just say, oh, this is a completely biased sample. What we're also really not looking at is the completed suicides, and that we will never know. I do know from my own clinical experience, there have been times when I've heard that people have died in unusual circumstances and single vehicle accidents and falls, and I have a hunch that that wasn't actually an accident. And for that reason, I was kind of keen to do this research to try and sort of shine a light to see what can be done. We don't know about the rates in emergency departments, and I still think that that wouldn't be a great route to go down, having people fill in screener questionnaires in emergency departments, because when people are in heightened distress, I don't know that that's the best way forward, but still we need to do something more there. And another problem, I guess, with our research was that we were looking at these symptom measures in the present rather than in the past, whereas the suicidal behaviour and self-harm may have been in the past when people may have had far more distress in their lives, may have been depressed, may have been using more substances. So it's not really contemporaneous. So that is a problem, and we may have got different findings otherwise. But I also really am very conscious that every single person who filled in our questionnaire would have had a story to tell, would have had a context around what had happened to them, their families, the ramifications for everyone, and the triggers. That trying to push it all into numbers is very reductionistic, and I feel that in the future we really should be looking more towards qualitative research to find out about the context and the meaning for those individuals, to see what recommendations we can make more specifically. So we've done what we've done, and we've made a lot of impact, I think, in terms of raising awareness in the media. There's still a lot more work to be done. And so I'm very grateful to Sonia for inviting me to talk about it today. I'm also very grateful to the funders, to the ADHD experts who advised us on how to go about conducting this research in a very sensitive area. To all those people who took part in our survey, we couldn't have done it without you, and it was very generous to share that information. And also to the people who contacted us to say thank you for taking this seriously, because they had actually lost somebody. And so they were very appreciative, I think, that we were raising awareness and trying to help. So that's all I was going to say. Thank you, Sonia.